AUD at UCLA, I also serve the department as the vice chair, also as the director of Master of Architecture program. I do run a practice called Young and Ayata. We're a bi-coastal practice based in New York City and Los Angeles. I've relocated here about 3 years ago to be part of the UCLA faculty. Without further ado, I want to share my screen, give you a presentation of our Master of Architecture program. And following that, we'll take any questions that you might have. We'll take you through kind of the culture of our school, the city a little bit, but really the program sequence and what studying here might look like, and the kind of work that we produce in collaboration with our students. Here we go. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay, great. All right. I guess the kind of one of the major questions is, aside from the institution that you might want to go to study architecture, is where that institution is located. Los Angeles, in that sense, is our home. It's uniquely placed in a place where perhaps forces of future climates pressure the kind of the quality of life in the city to the maximum extent. We do have ocean next to us. We do have a rumbling ground behind us. We do have fires that surround us. We do have climates that oscillate between coastal to desert as one moves from west to east. The city itself, through its own sprawl, has all kinds of problems, challenges, but also at the same time potentials. Kind of its sprawl that spans hundreds of miles allows one to kind of really get into all kinds of questions as one investigate the future of the city, the future of a city of Los Angeles, which was really not supposed to be here to start with. But we are here, and it's kind of reality presents us with a really interesting laboratory where the faculty practices, but also kind of investigates its potential futures through speculation. Within Los Angeles, of course, we're part of University of California, Los Angeles. We're part of also 10 campuses across the state of California, and we're #1 research university in the country. What that means is our mandate is really to serve the public through our research activities. And in order to do that, we look for collaborations, not only within the departments of the university, but also looking outwards towards the city to find opportunities to understand how life in the university might resonate beyond its borders within the extents of the city. This is our home, Perloff Hall. This is where the studios are. Those of you who haven't been here, we kind of gather here in our courtyard outside of our studio time. But most of your time in the school, you spend in a collective learning environment where designing, making, presenting, collaborating with your peers, with faculty, begins to really define the nature of how you build a culture at the school. The work that you produce after immense effort every quarter is, of course, evaluated by fellow faculty, invited guests that come from other schools, and put to the test of outsider views in terms of broadening our understanding of how we teach, how our understanding of how we learn, but how we collectively push our discourse forward through collaboration, both among students, among faculty, and our practitioners outside of the university. To bring us back to the program sequence, the as you might know, UCLA operates in a quarter system. We're not in semesters, meaning that we have 3 segments across the year: fall, winter, and spring. And of course, Master of Architecture program is a 3-year sequence. So you have these nine boxes in which you have a course sequence that slowly builds you up in terms of your skill and kind of conceptual depth. But also kind of a path to licensure towards the end of the 3-year sequence. This is simply divided into 2 parts. The first 2 years is what we call core, in which you take mostly required classes that takes a group of students who do have some architecture background and also a constituency who don't have any architecture background, and bring them really to the same level of knowledge and skill base at the end of the 2 years through required set of classes. And then you have the 3rd year in which you go into the advanced sequence, where you get to pick your topics to really kind of experiment with the skill set and knowledge base you gained in the previous 2 years. The sequence is made of out of obviously what's the cornerstone of each Master of Architecture program is the studio. The quarter setup we have allows us a couple of different opportunities. While we have studios for each quarter, there are opportunities for us to combine quarters where you end up staying on a problem a little longer, where you might have two quarter-long studios. Or in the case of the 3rd year research studio, where you will have a combined 3-quarter sequence where the first 2 quarters focus on research in seminar format, and followed by a studio sequence in the spring, which then culminates in a year-long effort for your graduation. This affords us kind of a rhythm of studying where we move through problems expediently, and sometimes in a slower, more sustained manner where we can kind of slow down and really stay on the problems to take on challenges of the complexity that a studio might offer. More of those I will speak in a little bit when I begin to show work samples. In the first year of your studies, apart from your studios, you're constantly supported by the series of architectural mediation, in which you learn not only the technical skill set of using media, drawing, modeling, digital fabrication, image making, not only as skill sets, but also conceptually driven inquiries, which help you really articulate the ideas you might develop, in your imaginary to put them out into the world through different means. There are set of sequence classes, both in building technologies and professional practice, that support the ancillary kind of disciplines that are crucial to the development of any architectural idea, any architectural reality. Then we have 5 history theory courses that are required. 2 of them are within the 2-year required courses. 3 of them are as electives. The topics which change from year to year depending on the area of research that governs the discourse at the school. And in your later part of the Master of Architecture sequence, you do have design electives, which again focus on problems of designs that are not really focusing on architecture with a capital A, but nonetheless kind of really kind of focusing on parts of how one thinks architecture, how one executes architecture. This could be technological problems, it could be building construction problems, this could be visualization problems, this could be fabrication problems. But there are your design electives for you to kind of freely experiment outside of the studio. I'm going to take you through sample works out of our studio sequence, starting with what you might encounter in the first year when you come here in the fall next year. But maybe before that, the thing to really kind of understand as an aspiring architecture student is to perhaps kind of recognize what is it that we do in our daily labor as architects. It's always kind of a cliche to say architects make buildings, but in fact, the daily time we spend on thinking about imagining buildings goes through these kinds of mediations, right? We do all those things. We draw, we sketch, we image, we animate, we debate, we talk, we lecture. These are all modes in which architectural knowledge, architectural thinking kind of goes through something, some form of translation from our imaginary out into the world, and it gains different formats. Yes, we do make buildings at the end, and that's, of course, kind of what we are trained to do. But most of our time we kind of spend mediating in different mediums. It would be fair to say there is no kind of hierarchy anymore, let's say, within architectural production, that it's not a medium-specific discipline, but perhaps we could call them medium-promiscuous discipline, where, you know, modes of handmade stuff versus digital-made stuff, your camera, your mouse, your pen, these are all necessary tools to kind of execute, try, experiment, and finally realize architectural thinking. And we don't necessarily think one governs over the other. In your first quarter, you'll be expected to kind of produce a lot of things, a lot of experiments. It's not one where we are kind of asking you to kind of execute architecture as you know or as you assume, but come at a point where your assumptions are challenged. Discover things where you begin to, through studies, kind of arrive at points where you begin to get a hunch or a sensibility of what might have architectural potentials. It might be a kind of material experiment. In this case, we're kind of experimenting with paper, understanding its geometric properties, understanding its structural properties, trying to get through a set of techniques that students individually develop, a kind of a prototypical, proto-architectural, we call them, conditions where suggestions of enclosure, suggestions of tectonics, suggestions of scale can begin to kind of give us ideas about how we might think through these articulations towards the architectural project. Every year, this material shifts. Every year, the program that this exercise might encounter can shift. But nonetheless, kind of gaining a discipline of how we manipulate matter, how we manipulate media, how we begin to draw, how we begin to kind of give scale and understanding of place, and understanding of sight, and understanding of how these things are drawn, examined, kind of put to test, scrutiny, fabricated, and really kind of put into the world as potential architectural propositions that begin to kind of give you a license to interrogate matter and form in a more kind of skillful manner. In this, you know, very first quarter, you'll begin to get a handle on how you begin to draw, how you begin to model, how you begin to image, how you begin to 3D print, but most importantly, begin to kind of articulate your thoughts through several modes of representation and mediation into outputs that can be looked at, that could be judged, that could begin to kind of galvanize a conversation, around the conversation. The winter studio kind of is maybe the first time you really get into a specific site and a program. And this is important because every studio sequence within the core after the first one begins to really take into consideration the realities of the climate that we are in Los Angeles. So our kind of mild climate here, our ability to think between outsides and insides in a maybe more flexible manner, is kind of put the test in a studio where we're looking at environments that are both inside and outside, both outside and outside, and both inside and inside, meaning that one has to transition in the studio from environments that we typically separate between buildings and landscape, but really push them into one another where there are transitional modes. What it also takes into account is the kind of necessity of buildings to engage structural realities, structural potentials. In this case, kind of examining the column as an expanded idea of a serial method as it modulates from very thin to very large, from singular to monolithic to the bundles where it begins to get kind of spatial in the way it organizes space. So structural organization versus climatic kind of attitudes begin to really put onto test on a specific site as a kind of arboretum project in the city. You'll see lots of drawings like this where kind of a seriality, kind of quantitative qualities of aggregation, how things come together, how they get modulated, how they begin to kind of put together a kind of organizational logic that negotiates what we understand to be outside and what we understand to be inside as a more malleable boundary. You work through all kinds of abstract notations in terms of developing systems towards translating them into more architectural representations in the form of plan drawings, but also physical models and other sorts of images where you begin to really interrogate the specificity of what you produce as you develop your systems. Drawings get more measured, more controlled. Other forms of axonometry enter the foray. Kind of getting a really handle on how we represent the architecture within conventions that we engage in terms of its representation, plans getting more kind of measured and precise. The specificity of Los Angeles moves into a kind of hyperdrive in the third studio. This is a recent change we made in our curriculum, taking housing from the second year into the first year, following kind of a recent change in zoning, which is really utilized by our own city lab, which is a separate lab within our school. And the policy change they've been able to kind of institute at the state level, which is the SB 9 zoning change, which allows single family kind of owners to develop additional dwelling units in their backyards. Now, this is especially crucial for a place like Los Angeles, where almost 90% of its ground is covered by single family homes. This allows us to think about new models of how we might densify in place rather than densifying in a nodal manner, which really doesn't kind of dent the healthy density development of the city. So students in this quarter to really look at kind of existing conditions of the city and begin to imagine how new housing typologies might be developed, not as a house, but set of houses, not housing at a large scale, but as kind of number of houses in which we begin to arrive at new typologies, therefore new kinds of fabric for the city. This, of course, requires you to kind of really gain the discipline of how to draw at a certain scale with kind of precise dimensions of housing. This is really kind of perhaps in the first year, if every quarter gives you a different kind of discipline. This is where precision of how we understand spatial layouts takes the foreground, but that doesn't mean you overlook kind of the characteristics or aesthetics of how these things begin to appear and define new kind of qualities, how the city might appear, how new kind of relationship between neighbors, new sections might emerge as we kind of modify the typology of the single family housing. Again, you work through drawings, images, physical models, all towards the ambition of rethinking how house or collection of houses begin to kind of appear in an altered manner, modifying the fabric of the city, how new modes of living together, whether it's generational, whether it's co-living, sharing, or other kinds of ownership models are examined, but ultimately manifested in new tectonic forms that really change the appearance of what we see around the reality of our everyday life. All right, so I'm gonna kind of quickly go through the series. As I said, next to your studios, there's this series of courses which allow you to kind of really experiment 5 weeks at a time on a single problem of architectural representation. You experiment with drawing in orthographics. You experiment with different forms of axonometrics and kind of line rendering strategies and articulations. You experiment within the kind of domain of image making through kind of collaboration of rendering and Photoshop manipulation, all within the genre of architectural photography. You also experiment with things like simulation and animation and kind of rendering behavior digital environment. So these kind of support your growth along the studio, all towards helping you to gain skill sets to support your ambitions of getting your architectural imaginary out into the world. All right, we're in the second year, fall again, and this again kind of taps into another kind of reality of Los Angeles, that's water scarcity. The studio kind of engages the infrastructure landscape of the city as a civic hybrid, but it really centers around the kind of this massive effort, which is the reality of in LA, where the water comes from hundreds of miles away, just jumping over mountains and terrains and managed with pumps and infrastructures and all kinds of large-scale projects so that when you turn on your faucet, water comes through. When kind of water essentially comes to the city, it is parked and moved through facilities like this, where big containers, big box containers almost kind of control and regulate our water in the city. So this quarter, we really kind of examine infrastructure landscape as a civic hybrid and really put into question facilities of LA Department of Water and Power and how that begins to kind of take place in the city. The scale really jumps. You're expected to think at an urban scale. Your forms of representation begin to shift from analytical to projective through a set of abstractions. You're expected to kind of really kind of amp up your modes of how you experiment with drawing and how your drawings begin to kind of inform how you design and begin to generate ideas in terms of how you develop character for your projects. The studio is looking less of a resolution in terms of an architectural object. It's looking for new ways of representing how a hybrid between architecture and landscape might begin to interrogate like their state within the city as a large-scale urban park where demonstration landscapes, in this case, begin to really articulate the grounds of this public surface. But really beginning to kind of get into understanding how a landscape is not limited to being understood as kind of a ground surface, but really as a ground relief where architecture and landscape begin to produce a different kind of symbiosis that goes beyond architecture sitting on land. Another recent change in our curriculum is the combination of these two studios, where you're immersed in a 2-quarter-long studio sequence where you have outside consultants in which all the knowledge you learn so far is put to test to really simulate what practice might look like. So you collaborate with your studio peers. You have outside consultants that come in towards the kind of design and development of a very resolute project, which begins to interrogate things like structure, facade, environmental performance, its aesthetics, its organization. So kind of thinking about the project not as isolated or focused forms of experimentation only, but carrying that experimental spirit to kind of really resolve an architectural proposition. So you are skilled in all aspects and disciplines of what it means to make a building. So you'll kind of really get into kind of solving a building. The goal here is not only kind of solve the building, kind of comprehensively understand how it's done, but comprehensively really kind of represent each discipline, whether it's its assembly, whether it's kind of appearance, its situation in the context, like having a handle on all aspects of what it means to produce a project. One of the maybe important aspects of the studio is this mandate for the last 2 years is to kind of ask students to engage an existing building. Your generation of architects, more than any other, will be working with existing building stocks. So how to engage existing aesthetics, how to kind of build upon them, how to reuse materials, how to reconceptualize buildings that might be made for other things, will be part of your everyday practice when you eventually begin to practice architecture in the world. So the studio kind of looks at existing building as an opportunity to kind of build upon to produce potentially new aesthetics. Now, some of these questions might focus on structure. Some of them might focus on kind of cladding. You'll again work through models and kind of detailed articulations in terms of really test their performance. If you're really focused on structure, you'll be expected to model and kind of simulate kind of forces on these things with the help of external consultants. If your interest is in color, tactility of facade elements, you'll develop them in detail and really test them in terms of kind of real world materials in the way not only how they feel, but how they begin to define the characteristics of a project. We do have a set of workshops for these, where these projects really develop in detail. Outside consultants come and work with our students, whether it's about facades, whether it's about structure or environmental design. You're kind of in a dialogue to kind of really articulate your ideas, again, through drawings and models and images, to kind of learn a way to kind of negotiate architectural design intent with other disciplines and learn to not only defend your work, but find ways of collaborating with consultants, which is very much the reality of practice when you're done with your studies. Drawings get even more measured, structural grids, learning to kind of develop technical kind of assembly details, not losing sight of what's at stake. That's of course the architectural idea, but really kind of interrogated again in more advanced and detailed forms of mediation, whether it's in axons or models, where we're looking at now, methods of assembly, interrogating how things come together, how spaces kind of flow within a building. How do we kind of explore these in very large scale models to understand assembly, the order of structure, first order, second orders, how enclosure begins to come in. But ultimately, we also care about how the resolution of images, how the resolution of aesthetically these things live and perform in the reality of the city are also put to test. So the reason for elongation of the studio is not to privilege technical over the conceptual, nor privilege the conceptual and overlook the technical, but really work in a sustained manner across these two different domains to make sure that projects that are conceptually kind of empowered are technically resolved, and students kind of really follow through in all their ambitions to kind of realize these ideas within their representations. Which brings us, after this kind of disciplined 2 years into the last year of study, where you'll be confronted and offered with variety of ideas as studios. This is a lottery setting in which you'll make your choices out of pool of studio topics, and you'll be placed in one of your top choices. This happens both in fall and winter of the third year. Couple of figures who have been teaching these studios, their topics, they're widely ranged, and these are topics brought by the each studio instructors, and they kind of focus on these things through architectural propositions. Without getting into kind of specifics of these, the purpose of kind of taking you through the third year is to really show kind of a breadth of approaches that oscillate between interrogations and very rigorous geometries in Neil Denari's projects to how the geometries might operate both on building level, but also on urban design level, to kind of imagine alternative outcomes for the city. To studios from Georgina Hulic, in which she continuously interrogates the aesthetics of doing work in the countryside, engaging the vernacular, how new architectural types might emerge if we think new forms of engaging existing buildings within the vernacular that might live comfortably both with what it's there, but also kind of produce novel new ideas in terms of how new tectonics might emerge through those collaborations. I do experiment with a lot of image making in terms of kind of how realism and the estrangement within photorealism might produce kind of emergent qualities, usually kind of experimented with like indirect media, images and images, how we might encounter architecture and formats that we typically don't do as architects, but how it might appear to others in kind of other media forms becomes kind of central to this quest. You engage things as far as thinking about metaverse, thinking about spaces, how one might imagine virtual reality environments and what that future reality might look like. The idea of avatars and programs and domiciles within virtual reality widely differ from our physical surroundings. Nonetheless, experimentation and that kind of domain is also possible depending on studio instructor. Or you might engage kind of the future of timber practices and experiment with how you might build with mass timber as prototype in Heather Robert's studio from last year. Model making can get super experimental in terms of how we experiment with gravity in different forms, how we kind of translate those experiments again back into orthographics, back into different modes of drawings, but always again not losing sight that we are at an architecture school and all the intuition and sensibilities that we build through these exercises come back in proposing things in a world where they begin to take a stance in terms of how our future reality might look like. The kind of cornerstone of the third year is, of course, the research studio. It runs all 3 quarters. Fall and winter are kind of seminars. This is different than, let's say, a thesis or a final project, because us being kind of us being a research university, we are kind of advancing our research in collaboration with you within projects like this. So each faculty member bring a research topic, and students collaborate collectively within that effort, first through 2 seminars and a design segment in the spring to kind of set forward ideas in terms of that research topic. Jason Payne's recent research topics looked at the future of Owens Lake, a dry salt lake, which has been the biggest source of pollution in the United States until the remediation efforts started 20 years ago. What might be the role of an architect in an environment like that? What might be ways of notating, demarcating, drawing, imaging? The future of that kind of landscape becomes the centerpiece of this effort. The chair, Mariana Ibanez, and myself kind of continued that effort last year to really speculate within image making in terms of what these infrastructural landscape hybrids might begin to appear within the context of future remediation. And research studios become kind of these moments at the end of the year where they're really open format in the way they're presented. In this case, our work in the studio last year was presented as a kind of exhibition opening where we could kind of meander, moving the boundary between kind of the work, the judge, the jury model, but really letting everyone get close to the work and engage in conversations with the authors and critics alike. Again, in some of my studios, privileging, in this case, the kind of future of synthetic proteins, how such food might look like as a point of entry, how places of production and cultivation of these environments might be like, how places of consumption of these environments might look like, kind of perhaps hooking in an idea, kind of really bringing them all the way around towards imaging, architectural imaging in terms of how they might change typologically. Or to reimagine kind of future of the cities as typologies and program shift, in this case, abandoned film studios becoming a kind of a city in its own right, reusing the air rights of the studio spaces that have been left blank in between them. Again, the format of presentation and the topics vary widely from studio to studio. The scale and ambition of interrogation oscillate between kind of really kind of speculative in terms of the way they engage sites, in terms of the scales from objects as small as houses to kind of portions of cities, or in this case, like network of cities that span 400 miles. Hitoshi Abe's research studios recently look at kind of the resilient potentials of how architecture and landscape design might play to counter the ever-growing threat of wildfires in California. The product in this case is not an exhibition, but really a kind of book that collects all the kind of research of the students throughout the year. Likewise, in Neil Denari's studio, while it's presented at the end of the year in an exhibition form, it's collected again as books that looks into the kind of future of high-rise typologies, etc. So these kind of topics vary widely from year to year, depending on the topic that faculty might bring, but it allows you to kind of immerse yourself and find your voice as a reaction to the brief that kind of caps your education here at AUD. Just if you have any questions, please email, and before we get any kind of questions, Jim will be answering these questions. Also to remind, our application deadline is January 6th. It's fast approaching, and you can let us know if you have any questions, and we'll be happy to get back to you. I'm gonna stop my share and take any questions that you might have. I think maybe in the interest of time, if you're typing anything, it'd be good to kind of maybe voice it and we'll kind of get to any questions.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was really curious about the last year in the spring semester. You said that
Yes.
the teachers, the professors bring in the research topic, and then the
Yeah.
students help them explore the solutions.
Yeah.
So is it every year, is it mostly focused on the urban fabric, or does it
No,
ever get to like, okay.
no. It's a year-long project, right? The topic is introduced in the fall, and the format is seminar in the fall and winter, and studio in the spring. So it kind of start as kind of seminar setting, research introduction, means and methods of how research is conducted, and then particular topic that gets investigated through set of I guess exercises that particular faculty sets up. The topics really range a lot. Like I'll give you an example from the way I run it. My interests are kind of various media through which architecture is kind of disseminated into the large world. And for me, that's a lot of image making, image manipulation in different formats. So that's my research. That's not an architectural topic, right? Under that, I allow students to pick any topic they want to pick, which then is kind of put through the lens of this. The only governing factor might be, all right, this year I want to speculate on kind of future urban scenarios or future scenarios of LA's reality for the next 40 years, right? This could be peripheral to the city. This could be landscape. This could be dense urban fabric. Students really decide what aspect they want to focus on, what topic they want to focus on. Then all I kind of want is how do we begin to kind of think about, we mediate those ideas in a way that begins to build a research effort in mediation. Without exception, I would say, your generation, our current students, I suspect the incoming generation as well, we don't have focused on questions of climate change. I would say the 2 years I ran this, every single topic that's decided by the students at some level ties into one aspect of the climate change reality, and how architecture kind of gains its agency in that shift through design and imagination. I have to say it's, of course, speculative, experimental, but kind of real in the sense that everybody's kind of feeling this, it's pressure, and students kind of take on. Sometimes it's a landscape project, sometimes it's a building project, sometimes it's out and about in the desert, sometimes it's dead center in the city. Other projects, in Jason Payne's case, Owens Valley, is 3 hours drive from LA. There is nothing around Owens Lake, right? So it really depends on what each faculty brings and what the topic might be. But you'll have a choice to kind of really kind of be in a studio where you want to kind of focus on the things that that feel close to you. Does it help you, Thomas?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Kutan, in the Q&A, there's a question, is there any specific qualities that AUD is looking for?
I suspect this is kind of a question about maybe portfolio and the application altogether. Look, what we're looking for is if you have an architecture background, if you don't have an architecture background, these are different ways of making a portfolio and putting together an kind of your foot forward, right? I think what we're looking is kind of signs of creative sensibility. This is super important, that you are kind of demonstrating a creative character in the way you put your application together. There's a sense of originality in your application. That obviously you're responsible and strong kind of you have a strong academic history. But we want to kind of get from your application, you're really dedicated to this, that you're kind of motivated to do this, because for some, this is a career change. For some, it's further focusing on what they're already doing. And from your application, we really want to get the sense that you are very serious about this. The faculty is incredibly motivated and dedicated to what they do. And they expect the same kind of motivation and dedication to the discipline and the world beyond through architecture in the way you approach it. So I would say this is probably the single most important thing. Everybody's application is different. Everybody's level is different. There is no kind of governing thing that would baseline establish what is it that we look for that's quantifiable. It's really qualitative in the way you represent yourself. All right, speaking of climate change, are there professor classes that focus on sustainable and regenerative design? Yes, there are. So I think this is kind of central to our core. And I want to emphasize this. This is an architecture school, not an engineering school, right? In some way, our agency of architects is having a grasp on the realities that pressure our environment, having an understanding materially, formally, organizationally, aesthetically, in terms of the resources that are around us, limited resources, and really begin to think about how we kind of strategize towards the image of a speculative tomorrow in this context. There are kind of building technology courses in which you get in technicalities of sustainability. The kind of larger conversation about what it means to be kind of sustainable, it of course beyond environmental kind of constraints of what it means to kind of build. It has to do with sites, it has to do with environment, it has to do with density, it has to do with equity, it has to do with existing building stocks, it has to do with materials. And in your core education, if you kind of think through the way the sequence has worked, these are all aspects we touch directly every single studio as an exercise. How to engage varying environments as they pressure a building, how to engage housing density towards more equitable kind of urban environment, how to engage kind of the immense infrastructure and landscape hybrids that enable the lifeline of the city. The kind of scarcity of water that pressures the city, how we engage the existing building stock in a meaningful and productive way forward. These are all parts of your core education. And I think as we kind of move forward, it's really going to be just more and more the kind of center point of all inquiry at all architecture programs. But the reality of LA is something that we live and practice every day, and that's what we bring into the classroom as much as we can. How would you say the UCLA research-oriented curriculum helps set your students apart from architecture programs? I think that's a super important question, really good question. We are under School of Arts and Architecture. This puts us in a really unique position as academics, meaning that the advancement, all academic faculty, right, depends on the advancement of their creative output. And our creative output is through practice in the real world, meaning that we preach what we practice and we practice what we preach. And in that kind of feedback loop lies research. So in some way, every kind of research topic that we bring into the studio is partially ingrained in the way we practice. And that feedback loop between what we do outside in the world, what we research, and how we involve you in it, in its real life applications, becomes crucial to being part of that effort. Now, if you were to do your thesis, right, it's kind of self-driven, isolated. It's a very different kind of mindset in terms of inventing your own problem and going after this. And this situates you outside of that singularity and makes you part of more of a collective effort towards a research topic. I would say it also foregrounds the collaborative nature of kind of architectural ambition out into the world. Because if you're a little familiar with practice itself and how architects are out into the world, we rarely ever work alone unless we're designing very small buildings or interiors. Anything beyond that requires the knowledge of many and constant dialogue and exchange of information between different disciplines. So I would say this is how a thesis model and a research model really produces different understanding of how we participate in the world as architects. Is there another question, or did I get to this? I did, I guess. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat about options for advanced standing or placing out of courses for those with an undergraduate degree in architectural studies, not a B.Arch. I can take that one if you want.
Sure.
Basically, unfortunately, we do not have advanced placement for our M.Arch program. It is going to be a 3-year program for all entering students, regardless of their background for their degree. However, there is an opportunity to place out of certain non-studio courses, structures, construction, environmental control systems. If you've taken them at your previous institution, you just set up a meeting with the instructor for the course. You go over the work you did in your undergraduate career, and you will have the opportunity to place out of those courses, keeping in mind that this will not give you unit credit towards graduation, but will give you freedom to take more electives to better spend your time here at UCLA. So whether that means taking additional technology or critical studies electives within the department, or giving you a wider opportunity to take advantage of the fact that you're at this major research institution called UCLA to take courses outside of the department to fulfill those additional elective units that you will have created for yourself as part of waiving out of these non-studio courses.
Did we answer the first question? We did, right? Okay. Peng, I think your first question, there is no advantage. Every year, half of our students have undergraduate architecture experience. Half come from completely different backgrounds. Again, this goes to kind of having a expression of a very strong intent and motivation, showing a degree of creativity in the way you represent yourself in your application. There is no advantage or disadvantage. We look at each candidate for their own merits. And every year, I mean, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, it always kind of 50, 55, 45. It's always down the middle in the way we build our student body. So there's nothing against people who have no experience. Everybody has some form of creative intuition. I would kind of recommend to foreground that as much as possible. I wanna maybe, if there are no other questions, I wanna kind of recommend to everyone to go make sure to go our website and visit each faculty's kind of site. Give you an idea of what each faculty does in their own practices. This will give you a sense of, how we're situated in the world. not only in the world of practice, in the world of academia, but in the world of architecture and physical environment, right? With the projects that we do. I can't emphasize enough how to make this decision wherever you end up going. Hoping you also, of course, consider us. That you understand the people who you will be studying with and what they do. Like understand kind of how they approach practice, how they approach academia, where they teach in a program. I think familiarizing yourself with what makes a department, what makes a school is really important, regardless of where you apply. But also, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, the place in where you undertake the study, where you critically really engage the realities and challenges of that place as a laboratory is incredibly crucial. I think for me, as a recent kind of transplant from East Coast to West Coast, I was kind of maybe blown away by how sites meant very differently here in Los Angeles than to my East Coast homes. How much more they're charged with environmental pressures and social pressures. So as you make your decisions in terms of where you want to kind of set up your laboratory of study, consider those contexts very carefully. All right. If there are no further questions, this could be also administrative questions. If you have admissions, financial aid, anything that you might want to ask Jim, I probably would give you the wrong answer and Jim will give you the right answer. But anything you might ask, this is the time. Otherwise, you can always email him and give a couple of days and he'll get back to you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
All right, everyone. Have a wonderful night. Right.